In the small, unassuming town of Willow Creek, Indiana, life moved at a gentle pace. On the fringes of town, where the cornfield swayed softly in the breeze and the sun cast long shadows as it dipped below the horizon, stood Pat's Diner. It was a classic roadside establishment with a glossy, red and white checkered design, a flickering neon sign that read "Open 24 hours," and the intriguing smell of freshly grilled hamburgers wafting out to greet passers-by. Ever since he was a boy, Jamie Carter had loved this diner. It was a place filled with nostalgia, where the taste of chocolate malts and the sound of laughter intertwined to create cherished memories. Jamie had grown up in Willow Creek, but like many young men, he had set out to explore the world, later finding himself in the military, serving his country with courage and honor. After a challenging deployment, Jamie had returned home, the weight of his experiences heavy on his shoulders. He yearned for the company of familiar faces, a warm meal, and the comfort that only a hometown diner could provide. On a sunny afternoon, he pulled into the gravel parking lot of Pat's Diner, hoping for a peaceful respite and a chance to connect with a town he had missed dearly. As he walked to the entrance, Jamie adjusted his crisp, olive-drab military uniform, a reminder of his service. The sunlight reflected off his medals, and as he stepped through the door, the familiar jingle of the bell above the threshold announced his arrival. Many heads turned, eyes widening with a mix of surprise and curiosity. It was rare to see someone in uniform around these parts, and Jamie couldn't help but smile back at the faces peering curiously his way. Dave, the friendly waiter, well loved by the locals, immediately recognized Jamie. He was a large man, sporting a bushy mustache that bobbed as he approached, and he exuded warmth like a cozy blanket. "Welcome back, Jamie. It's good to see you, son," he exclaimed, his eyes crinkling in a joyful smile. "Good to see you too, Dave. It feels great to be back," Jamie replied, feeling a wave of nostalgia wash over him. "Your usual?" Dave asked, already reaching for his notepad. "Just a cheeseburger and a black coffee, please," Jamie replied, taking a seat at the familiar booth by the window. He looked around the diner, eyes landing on the walls adorned with photographs, images of regulars who had become part of the diner's rich history. Each photo told a story, and suddenly, Jamie felt like he was stepping back into a time capsule of his youth. As Dave disappeared into the kitchen, Jamie took a moment to soak it all in. The sound of sizzling burgers and the clattering of dishes were music to his ears. He felt the weight of the world lift slightly. He longed for connection and conversation, to catch up with the people who had shaped his childhood. However, not everyone was welcoming. At the counter, Frank, the manager, a stout man with an air of authority, watched Jamie with a narrowed gaze. Frank had been running Pat's Diner for years, and he was known for being a decent businessman but also for his stubborn views. He had spent years perpetuating the idea that things should always remain the same, shielded from change. As Jamie sat there basking in the atmosphere, he felt a wave of hostility radiating from the manager. Frank's lips curled into a snarl as he stood up from his stool at the counter. "You need to leave," Frank said, his voice surprisingly loud, abrupt. The words pierced the pleasant ambience of the diner. The chatter faded into an uncomfortable silence as all eyes turned to Jamie. Jamie blinked, confusion evident on his face. "Excuse me," he said, a note of disbelief creeping into his voice. "I just want a meal. Is that too much to ask? This is my diner. I don't serve your kind here," Frank shot back, disdain dripping from his words as he gestured at Jamie's uniform. The comment stung like a bee, and Jamie felt a mix of anger and disbelief boiling inside him. He had endured so much during his service. The camaraderie and respect he had earned felt so distant now. "Because I'm in uniform," Jamie questioned, striving to keep his composure. "I thought this country valued its veterans." "Oh, we do, until they start thinking they are better than the rest of us," Frank said, crossing his arms defiantly. The tension in the diner thickened. Patrons exchanged uneasy glances, and Jamie could sense the mounting discomfort. Quietly, he decided he wouldn't back down. "Look, I served this country, he explained, his voice firm. I fought for the rights of everyone in this room, including you. At that moment, Jamie reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, an envelope that had been a source of comfort for him during difficult times. This is a letter from Alex Harper's family, he said, his voice steady. He served with me and didn't make it back. The diner fell into a hushed stillness. Jamie unfolded the letter, his heart pounding. He began to read aloud. They said I was there for Alex in his final moments. They are grateful for what I did. And now I stand here, and I'm told I don't belong? Does that make sense to anyone? A palpable shift occurred in the diner. A wave of sympathy and understanding washed over the patrons. Heads nodded in agreement, eyes softened, and a sense of unity began to build. Sitting at the counter, an elderly man with silver hair stood up. His right, he boomed, his weathered face filled with emotion. I'd like to pay for your meal, young man. He placed a wrinkled $50 bill on the counter, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of experiences and sacrifices made in service. With newfound support, Blosso Frank's bravado began to buckle. His face turned a deep shade of crimson, caught in a battle between pride and shame. Wait, this isn't fair, he protested, desperation creeping into his voice. Jamie held up a hand, cutting through the noise. What's not fair is shutting someone out without a reason. If we're going to build a better community, we need to stand up for each other. His words were laced with a profound wisdom born from hardship. Frank clenched his fists, wrestling with his own misjudgments. The patrons drew closer, their support surrounding Jamie like a protective shield. Jamie continued, I fought for every meal shared in freedom, shared in kindness and respect. Does anyone want to live in a world where we judge others based on what they wear or who they are? The elderly man at the counter voiced what many were beginning to feel. It's time we acknowledge the sacrifices made for us. All of us, together. Ming from the crowd, a burly truck driver, chimed in. I'll cover the coffee, he declared, his voice booming through the diner like a rallying cry. Other patrons began to clamor in agreement, each wanting to contribute to Jamie's meal. You deserve to eat here, just like everyone else, shouted a young woman seated in the back, her face radiating defiance against Frank's prejudice. Frank's shoulders slumped. He glanced around the diner, taking in the crowd's emotions. Faces softened in empathy, resolve shining brightly in their eyes. You're right, he finally mumbled, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. I made a mistake. I treated you poorly. Jamie took a deep breath, his own heart beginning to swell. It's okay, Frank. We all have moments we're not proud of. He flashed a reassuring smile that echoed the warmth of the diner. As what began as a confrontation shifted into a powerful moment of connection, the patrons erupted into applause, clapping hands, and cheers escaping their lips. The atmosphere thickened with a newfound sense of unity, acceptance, and harmony. Frank's expression softened as he returned to his post behind the counter. He felt the warmth of the diner clamoring around him, the voices mingling into excited chatter. Your meal is on the house, he finally declared, addressing Jamie, his tone much gentler. I have no right to take your money. Thanks, Frank, Jamie said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a grateful smile. I truly appreciate it. As the diner began to swing back into its rhythm, Jamie settled into his booth with a sigh of relief. He watched as Dave brought out his cheeseburger, the glorious aroma wafting intoxicatingly into the air. It was the little things that began to heal him, the sound of sizzling patties, the low murmur of conversations, and the familiar sensation of belonging. Just as Jamie took his first bite of the juicy burger, the door swung open once more, and a young girl peeked inside, her wide eyes filled with innocence. She was holding a handmade sign that read, "Thank you for your service," decorated with colorful markers and glitter. "Look, Mama, that man is a hero," she exclaimed, her voice ringing with genuine admiration. The patrons in the diner chuckled, and Jamie's heart swelled. He smiled at the little girl, a surge of warmth filling his heart. In that moment, He felt the trickle of pride wash over him. It was proof that the simple act of standing up for oneself could ripple out into enormous waves of impact, an awareness that could inspire generations to cherish kindness. As the afternoon melted into evening, Jamie found himself enveloped in the tapestry of laughter and stories being exchanged around him. Strangers shared their tales, bound by the moment that had turned them into allies. It turned out that many had loved ones who served, and Jamie found himself in deep conversations that reignited his spirits. A couple at the adjacent booth, middle-aged and amiable, shared stories of their sons, one who had recently enlisted and one who had just returned. They spoke with pride, admiration, and also fear, recognizing the weight those uniforms carried. Jamie listened intently, offering advice when called for, and soaking in the wisdom born from connection. In the corner booth, two teenage girls weaved tales of high school antics, painting the picture of an innocent childhood littered with fond memories. Jamie remembered his own youth with a chuckle, and their laughter filled the air around him like music. The diner had transformed into a lively chorus of shared stories, empathy, and understanding. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink, orange, and violet, Frank picked up his guitar from behind the counter. He strummed a few chords, testing the crowd's interest. "How about a little music?" he announced, a new light in his eyes. The diner erupted in cheers. Jamie felt a rush of positivity as the familiar tunes began to weave their way through the diner. People of all ages clapped along, the sound of camaraderie thrumming in the air. As he heard Frank's voice ring out in harmony with the guitar, Jamie took in the juxtaposition of the diner's atmosphere, the warmth and connection, the way strangers had come together to support a fellow veteran. Their small acts of kindness had created a spark, igniting a sense of community that had been dormant for far too long. While the laughter echoed through the night, Jamie finally felt the burden he had carried since returning ease. He had come home hoping to take comfort in the familiarity of his childhood diner, yet he had stumbled upon something far greater. Pat's Diner had become a microcosm of what towns could be, a blend of acceptance, understanding, and open hearts. As the night wore on, Jamie found himself partaking in the music, singing along with patrons, each strum of the guitar opening up new friendships. He felt the rush of warmth from the newfound connections, the bonds that had been formed from both adversity and triumph. As the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, casting a midnight glow over Willow Creek, Jamie glanced around the diner, realizing that he was not just a visitor, he was home. The community had welcomed him back with open arms, no longer marked by barriers of confusion and misunderstanding, but by an atmosphere of respect and shared experiences. After a long while, as the last song faded and the people began to share their goodbyes, Jamie felt a tap on his shoulder. It was the little girl from earlier, her sparkling eyes reflecting the joy around her. "Mr. Hero, can I take a picture with you?" she chirped, her sincerity warming Jamie's heart. "Of course," Jamie said, crouching down to her level, beaming. The girl's mother stepped in, snapping a photo as the two shared smiles, capturing a moment of connection that would last a lifetime. As Jamie stood to leave, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. He nodded at Frank, whose expression had softened well beyond the tension of their earlier encounter. "Thank you for today, Frank. You have a great place here," Jamie said, sincerity in his voice. Frank smiled back, his demeanor transformed. "No, thank you, Jamie. You've changed this diner today. You really opened my eyes," he replied, the gratitude evident in his voice. Finally stepping out into the night, Jamie took a deep breath of the cool, crisp air. It felt fresh and liberating, sailing through his lungs like a breeze of renewal. He glanced back at the bright neon sign of Pat's Diner. It flickered like a star against the darkness, a beacon of hope and transformation. As he drove home, Jamie reflected on the day, the struggles, the triumphs, the warmth of new friendships forged through understanding. He felt a sense of belonging that he had longed for, a deeper connection to his community than he could have imagined. And for the first time since returning, he felt truly at peace. Perhaps, he mused, it wasn't just the burgers and milkshakes that filled Pat's diner. It was the very essence of togetherness, the kind of magic that arose when hearts united. A community bound by kindness, empathy, and a newfound appreciation for one another. And it was in those moments that real change began. As the last remnants of sunlight faded, and the clouds shifted into darkness, the only thing illuminating the streets was the charming glow of the diner, a promise of friendship, acceptance, and the magic that happens when we stand up for one another. Finally feeling at home, Jamie knew that this was not the end of his journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with an ever-expanding family, love, unity, and respect. And he couldn't wait to see where it would take him.